Hi, everyone. It's so good to have you all here again. Welcome to this second live webinar. As you know, we're now in the fourth module of the course, and it's hard to believe we're already more than halfway through this journey. But I hope you're all learning a lot and being inspired by our guest experts and also by your fellow learners. We've noticed in the discussion forums and in the questions and comments that you have during these live sessions that you all bring in such diverse perspectives from your own work and personal experiences. And that has really enriched this course for all of us. I know some of you have joined us along the way and may not have caught up with everything yet. So just by way of a quick recap on what we've already learned on the course so far, and while we also give a couple more minutes for others to join, Module 1 answered the question, why social innovation and entrepreneurship? Laying the foundation of what social entrepreneurship is and how it's connected to global transformations in business and industry. Module 2 looked at social entrepreneurship and the corporate world. And then Module 3 introduced us to systems change and levels of impact. I'm sure those of you who managed to join Mark and I for the interactive office hours session last week will agree that it was quite insightful and created an open space for you guys to speak to one another about what you're working on and the challenges you're facing in your entrepreneurship journey, and also to exchange tips for success based on your own experiences, which was really great. Now, Module 4, which we've been exploring this week, is about developing change maker skills to advance social impact. And in my opinion, there's absolutely no one better placed to speak to us about this than Mark Cheng, who is our guest expert today. Mark is an experienced social investor who has advised, invested in, and helped raise over $250 million for more than 100 social ventures since 2007. He's the author of the Social Investment Toolkit, a guide for social entrepreneurs on how to raise finance, and the Social Innovation Circle, a series of programs where social innovators can find all the concepts and coaching needed to raise blended finance. With over a decade of experience as an investment banker, Mark has developed a holistic understanding of the role of the corporate sector and multi-sector partnerships in advancing innovative solutions to mitigate our most pressing social issues. He writes and speaks frequently on social innovation and finance and has contributed to several well-known publications. He's also a senior advisor at Ashoka, supporting hundreds of social entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in Europe, Africa, and Asia. So as you can hear, we are really in for a treat today, because to add to the course material that we've already provided for this module, Mark is going to be dishing out a lot of excellent nuggets, tools, and resources, and so on social innovation and entrepreneurship. So the format will be slightly different today, and it will be more like a workshop where Mark will make a presentation, share some ideas with us, and then we'll have some Q&A afterwards. So I urge you to have pen and paper ready, because you're going to want to take some really good notes. And of course, make sure to put your questions in the comment section below the screen as we go, and we'll try and make sure that we answer as many of them as the time will allow. So Mark, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sharon. It's great to be here, and hello, everyone. Thank you for having me on this course.
Great, it's always good to have you. And before we begin though, I just want to remind those that are watching live to click on the survey button below to indicate that you're watching live so that you can get the extra points for that. Right, Mark, please tell us a little bit about what draws you to find, and not just to find, to also create tools for social innovation.
Okay, so well, firstly, thank you for the very kind introduction. So I've been working with Ashoka and Ashoka Fellows and Social Entrepreneurs for almost 20 years now. And my original background, as you mentioned, was very much coming from the corporate financial world. So I used to be an investment banker. I used to help raise money for corporations and really help them to make the pitch. And what I've been doing since in the last 15 or so years is working with social entrepreneurs, and whether they're entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs who are also trying to make social change. And one of the things that I've observed is that everybody is still struggling with this issue around how to find the right business models in order to take an impactful idea to market. And so in the course of helping organizations and entrepreneurs to fundraise, what I've had to do is develop a whole series of frameworks and tools that helps them to do that. And I think those tools are very applicable, whether you are an NGO, whether you are a charity, whether you are a startup, whether you are a large organization or a small organization. There's a certain process that we've observed of how you take an idea that can change, social systems or make a huge impact in the world, and how that idea has to progress and develop. And so that's really what I want to share a little bit about today.
Well, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I'm very excited by this. This is the first time that we've tried this format, and indeed even this content. So I'm very curious to see how people on this call, find this material. And my encouragement is, as I speak, please do write questions in the chat, which Sharon can then curate, and we can have a bit of Q&A as we go. So don't let me just rabbit on for 40 minutes. I think we can make this a little bit less dry, and we'll see. And we'll have plenty of time at the end in order to be able to have a good conversation about the ideas that I'm going to present today. So what I want to do today is I want to share with you a framework which I've been using with hundreds of entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs as they think about how to bring an idea, whether it's a business idea or whether it's an impact idea or whatever social idea it is, into the world and to scale it up. And the framework that I want to present today is called the 3 stages in the life cycle of a social business idea. Okay, the 3 stages in the life cycle of a social business idea. And I'm going to just quickly share my screen, and let's see if we can get this going. So can I just check that my screen is now visible and full scale?
Yes, we can see that.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's talk about what this framework is about. So what I think is really, really helpful when you are, a social entrepreneur or a social innovator in bringing an idea to market, and typically what the perspective that I come from is how to get funders to back you and support what you do, is to have in the back of your mind these 3 very, very distinct stages in the development of an idea. And the 3 stages, which I think every social innovation goes through, is what we might call the prototype stage, the standardization phase, and then the scaling phase, okay? So prototyping is when you're developing your idea and you're running experiments and you're trying to work out which idea actually solves the problem that you're trying to work on. Standardization comes when you found the idea and you found a fit with a customer need or beneficiary's need. And now what you need to do is enter a phase where you're refining the idea and perfecting the idea and actually making sure that you know how it works in all its different facets, right? And then only when you've done that at the end do you want to start thinking about scaling up and growing the idea, okay? And by separating out the evolution of your idea into these three distinct phases, that really, really helps, because the biggest mistake that I see organizations and individuals making is they get very confused about what phase their idea is in. And when I say idea, I don't just mean a startup. I mean, it could be actually the organization that you're working for, right? So you launch a startup and then you're growing it to mid-stage and then you're growing it to advanced stage and maturity. But it could be if you're an entrepreneur and you're working in a company and you've got an idea and you need to test it out and so on. So it works at different levels. It works both for individual products and services. It works whether you are an organization which is dedicated solely to the idea, or whether the idea is just one program in a whole series of programs and products and services which your organization is running. For each of the different ideas, you want to have a very, very clear sense of which stage you're in. And the reason why is because these three stages are totally different when it comes to key features, right? So I want you to imagine the phases of water, for example, right? Just as water has three completely different phases, there is, the ice phase where it's solid, then the liquid phase, and finally the gas phase, right? And the nature of water changes as you go from one to the other. That's exactly what happens with an organization. So, or a business idea. So in the prototype phase, we often call this the 0 to 1 stage, right? In other words, it's the where you go from nothing, having an idea which one customer finds attractive and will buy. And then once you've found your first customer, then you go from 1 to 1,000. And now you're starting to build the idea and you're starting to grow it and you're starting to produce more and more of it. And only when you've reached probably your 1,000th customer are you really in a position to start talking about how to get to 1 million customers. And why I'm describing this as similar to the phases of water, where you go from ice to liquid to steam, is because what happens in your organization with your team and how you present changes from stage to stage. They're actually totally different. So every single phase is different, and it's different in three key ways. It's different in terms of the goal that you're trying to achieve during that phase. It's different in terms of the way that you're organized and the way that your team is going to be. And it's going to be very different in terms of what you're going to be pitching to funders and asking for. Okay, so if we think about these three dimensions, the goal that you're trying to achieve, the organization and how your team should be operating, and then how you fund yourself and how you get and how you find funders for your idea, each one of those is going to be totally different, whether you're in the prototype phase or the standardization phase or the scaling phase. And the biggest mistake, as I said, is to have the wrong goal for the wrong phase. So I see a lot of entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs, and they're in the early stages. They're in the first couple of years of development. And they're already talking about how we're going to reach 1 million customers. And they're already thinking about the design of their product, and they haven't even prototyped it yet. And they're already worrying about that, right? Or they're worrying about how they're going to raise $10 million in order to scale up and get to countrywide saturation. And that's totally the wrong way of thinking about it, right? If you can't walk before, you can't run before you can walk. And so what you want to do is be very, very targeted in what you're doing in each stage. So what I want to do now is I just want to quickly walk you in detail through each of the different stages, how they look, how they operate, how they work. And then I'd be very curious in a sort of conversation with people on the call about whether this framework is helpful, whether you can see how it might relate to an idea which you're working on right now, and to discuss, various challenges that you might have about working out which stage you're in and how to move from one stage to the other. So let me just quickly take 10, 15 minutes. I'm going to walk you through in detail a short description of each phase, And then let's talk about it. Okay, let's see whether this resonates with you. So let me give you an example. Let me just give you an example of how a team might think about developing a social business idea in the context of these three phases. So let's imagine, for example, there is a healthcare company. And let's imagine that you are an executive in that healthcare company. And let's suppose that the healthcare company operates a whole different range of products and services. It's operating in the medical space. It has access to pharmaceuticals. It has access to different types of medical products. It makes medical equipment, and it has a goal. It has a market which includes Africa, which is an area of the world which is deeply affected by certain diseases like malaria, for example. And let's supposing that as an entrepreneur, as a social entrepreneur, you as the executive are interested in the idea of how could I launch a product or a service or create something new, leveraging the resources of my organization in order to do something which fits with what we do, but at the same time is going to be something very impactful in the future. Okay, so let's supposing what happens is the entrepreneur, or the entrepreneur in this case, starts brainstorming with a team, and they set themselves a goal. Can we come up with a product or a service that will ultimately contribute towards the eradication of malaria, right? So what would happen is the first thing you should be doing is going into the prototype phase. And in the prototype phase, what you're doing is coming up with as many different ideas as possible about how to actually address this problem, what might actually work, right? And supposing that our team decides, well, we can think of at least 3 different ways we could do it. Maybe what we need is an equipment company that's very good at draining swamps so that we can remove the habitat of the mosquito which breeds malaria, right? So that's one idea, a construction company that's specifically about draining swamps. Another idea we've got is one of our members has developed the malarial bed net, a net that you can fit over your bed, and it will block out the mosquito at night, right? And you don't get bitten, right? Maybe that's a very effective way of doing it. And then a third team member comes up with an idea of coming up with distribution of malarial tablets to large-scale populations in order to try and drive down the infection rate of malaria, right? So in the prototype stage, you don't know which one of these ideas is going to be the right one, right? Notice also that the ideas can be completely different, right? They're focused on solving the problem, but they do so in totally different ways. You've got a construction company, you've got a bed net company, and you've got a pharmaceutical product here. So they look totally different in terms of design, price, distribution, traction, and so forth, right? So the idea of the prototype stage is don't fixate on one too quickly. It's come up with as many prototypes as you can, and then explore with your potential beneficiaries or your customers which one might be the one that works best, right? And so the goal of the prototype stage is not to say, okay, how can I get 1 million malarial bed nets produced, right? Because you've jumped too quickly to the answer, and it may not be the right answer. The prototype stage is about saying which of the various ideas which I can come up with is ultimately going to find the best product market fit or customer market fit. And so what you do is you launch a couple of prototypes. You go to a village and you give out these medicines, right? You go to another village and you offer them malarial bed nets. And you go to the third village and you say, can we drain the local swamp and see what happens, right? And what you will discover is feedback that you could never have known before you tried doing these experiments, right? Which is another reason why there's absolutely no point in writing the business plan before you've even begun. And so a lot of people write a business plan, they ask for $10 million, and then they have to go all in on the construction company. And only do they realize after they raise the money that that was the wrong plan, right? And they could have saved themselves all of that trouble if they'd only run a series of micro experiments and gone, okay, which of these is the right one? And guess what? The best answer is the malarial bed net, right? We were so sure it was going to be the medicines. We were so sure that was going to be the most cost-effective and the best way to eradicate or to minimize the number of infections. But to our great surprise, it was the village that adopted the bed nets that was the one that was the most successful. So congratulations, if you've done that, you've done the prototype phase in the right way. You haven't spent a fortune. You haven't gone double down on one solution too early. And you've actually tested this in the market with real customers or real beneficiaries before you went too far and jumped in too fast, right? And that's how you do a prototype stage. So what you do in the prototype stage is you're running experiments, right? And so the right way to think about your team, your organization, or your role in the first stage is not the creator, it's not the mass assembler, it's not the producer, it's the inventor. That's the best analogy for what you're doing. You're in the kitchen as a chef and you're coming up with all these recipes, you know, the pizza, the hot dog, the burger. And the question is, which one is the customer most going to like? Which one is the customer most going to go for? So every organization, every social business idea should go through a prototyping stage. It shouldn't presume what the answer is, and it shouldn't write the business plan before you've actually tested this with some real customers and got some feedback, right? And so the goal at the end of the pilot phase or the prototype phase is your first customer. It's as simple as that. You're not looking for 1 million customers. You're looking for just one customer who genuinely buys your product and tells you that there is value in that product, right? That you have actually solved the problem for them, right? And so the prototype phase is always start very, very small. Okay, you're not interested in scale at this point, so don't even worry about that, right? Don't worry about all the things that you need. In fact, don't even worry about many of the things that you think all products and services need to have in mind, like your gross margin, like the price point, or like the delivery channel and so forth, right? At this stage, all you need is just to confirm that the product itself actually works, and that is goal number one, and in fact, almost the only goal of this stage. And so, how should you organize in the prototype stage, right? What kind of team should you be building? What kind of group do you lead in order to do this? Well, it's going to look very, very agile and improvisational, right? And so an analogy that we often use is every team member in a prototyping organization or in a prototyping product phase is like a jazz player in a jazz band, right? Everyone is playing a little part of the melody. People can jump in and out. People can often pass one part of the job spec to another person and so forth. Everything is highly fluid, highly interchangeable. And so what you need during this point in time is people who are very, very agile, who are very, very comfortable with evolving roles. Nothing is too set in stone at this point. There's no product manager at this point in time because there's no product at this point in time. And there's certainly no playbook for how to produce the product because you're working it out as you go. And so it requires a very, very entrepreneurial team, and probably a very small team, and a team that has a very, very high tolerance for change. Okay, so that is the kind of team that you want to have. And then how do you pitch that team and that stage to a funder? And that funder might be an angel investor. It might be an early stage investment fund. It might be the investment committee of your company, right? Or your boss or your manager. So what you don't want to do is say, please give me $1 million in order to build this business plan and achieve 1 million customers. You're far too early to do that. So the pitch for a prototyping stage business idea is help me find a product fit. Give me some capital so that I can run 4 or 5 experiments. And in 6 months' time, I will come back to you and tell you which one of these products, whether it was the malarial medicine or the malarial bed net or the construction company that drains the swamps, is the right one, right? Which one will solve the problem for the cheapest amount of money in the best possible way. And so the success of the pitch is not, I'm going to land 1 million customers. It is, I'm going to come up with the answer as to which product best fits the market need. And that's what you're raising money for. Okay. And if you can do that, that's the end of the product stage. So let's talk then about the movement then into the next phase of the social business idea. So let's assume that our medical company. Sorry, Sharon, please go ahead.
Can I just jump in there? I just have a couple of questions. I really like the illustration about the ice, the fact that you treat ice and steam differently. So you really have to look at each phase in a completely different way. I have 2 quick questions. Number one, you mentioned you can't run before you walk, right? How do you reconcile that with the popular mantra that's there to say, begin with with the end in mind, and the pressure that comes from investors to say, tell us what the big picture is. And the second question has just gone out of my mind, but maybe just respond to the first one.
Sure, absolutely. So a couple of things. Well, firstly, when you say begin with the end in mind, it is true that's what investors typically ask for. Tell me what the vision is, right? The mistake is to think that in the prototype stage, what they're asking for is a business plan, all right? So I'm an angel investor. I invest in hundreds of businesses. And I can tell you absolutely that the last thing that I'm interested in a pitch for somebody who is prototyping is what is their 5-year business plan and how many units will they be selling in 5 years, right? That may sound very counterintuitive, but what I'm looking for in the first stage is an entrepreneur who says, I've got a hunch that we can actually solve malaria in East Africa in the next decade, all right? So what they do is they define the end as a goal. And the goal is defined as the satisfaction of a customer need in some way, right? But what they're not doing is they're not saying, and therefore that means we're going to be selling 10 million malarial bed nets, right? They haven't got to the point yet where they've fixated on the specific delivery method or the solution that will solve the problem. And so if you're an early stage entrepreneur or intrapreneur, you're not saying, listen, I need to scale up 1,000 of these products. What you're saying is, I believe this problem is solvable, and you define the problem really well, right? I have a hypothesis about how it can be solved, right? Can you back me to test my hypothesis? And if my hypothesis is correct, we'll then be in a position to give you a business plan for scaling, right? So it's actually a 2-stage process, not a 1-stage process. The first stage is, I need to prove my hypothesis. Will you back me to prove the hypothesis? And only then do you move into the standardization phase. And when you're in the next phase, you've now proven the hypothesis. So you know that malarial bed nets will reduce malaria by 98% in the villages where they are widespread, okay? That's the end of your hypothesis testing phase. You've now got the validation, which is that you can reduce malaria by 98% as long as you can get malarial bed nets into every household in the village, right? Then you're able to go to the funder and say, okay, I got a business plan now. I know what the product is. I know that it works. Now I need to standardize this and get this out into 1,000 villages. And that's when you produce your 5-year business plan. Okay. So yeah, just as that answer the first question. Yeah.
Yes, it does. And just very quickly, the second one was how long does the prototyping phase last? I know it will probably differ across businesses and products and so on, but can you give any sort of rough indication?
It can be anything from 6 months to a couple of years. So 6 months means you got a hypothesis, you got a hunch, you go in and you test the hunch with a couple of customers, and then you prove it, right? And typically, the reason why it can be as quick as that is because at this point, you're not trying to test too much. So for the malarial bed net example, the team doesn't want to go and work out, do malarial bed nets work? What price should I charge for it? Where should I sell the malarial bed net? What kind of design do people want? Do they want to have the big net or the small net? All of those questions, right? Those types of questions come in the next phase, which is the standardization phase, right?
Okay.
But in the prototype phase, you just want to answer one question. Do malarial bed nets work? Okay. And so what you might do is just go out to a village and say, listen, I'm going to give you this product for free. Okay. Imagine that you've just got it. Okay. Can you please use it for the next few months, and we'll measure whether how many people get infected with malaria, right? And so you've taken off during that phase all of the critical commercial questions that must be answered later on. How much should I charge? Where will people buy this? How do I market this? And so on, right? So it's a very simple question in the prototype phase. Does the product work? Okay. If the answer is yes, congratulations, you now move on to the next part of it, which is that malarial bed nets will fix the problem of malaria. Now what you're doing is you're now producing malarial bed nets, and now what you're trying to do is test all the commercial hypotheses that you need to satisfy, right? What is the right price point? Can I try $50? Oh, that's too expensive. Should I lower it down further? And where should I sell this? Do I sell this in shops, or do I go door to door and sell this, to people, using traveling salespeople? So during the standardization phase, the product. Now you've got to work out all the design features, right? And the goal of this phase is to work out exactly what that product should look like when it's sold to 1,000 or 10,000 customers, right? So imagine my chef in the kitchen. He's in the kitchen. He's now worked out that people want the burger, not the hot dog. That's great. So what he does is he goes out and he sets up a burger stand, and now he's trying to sell burgers to customers, right? And initially he's doing it all himself. And what he's doing is he's working out, how do people like their burger? Do they want one bun or two? Do they want to have sesame seeds on it? Do they want to have it with tomato sauce or hot sauce or whatever, right? And eventually, after 1,000 iterations of selling the burger, he knows exactly what the burger should look like, right? In order to satisfy as many customers or beneficiaries as possible, right? And so that's the goal of the standardization phase. And the team that you need in order to deliver that looks very different from your first team. Okay, your first team was the jazz band. Everyone's trying a bit of this and that. Everyone has the freedom to innovate. Everyone can change the product features as they wish, based on what they perceive as the need on the ground. When you move into standardization, you can't do that anymore, right? You've got a product, the burger or the malarial bed net. Okay, you've got to churn this out and get to 10,000 customers, right? And standardize it. So at this point, what you need is not a jazz band, but a marching band. You've got to give everyone the playbook. You've got to tell them exactly how they do this. You sell it in a shop like this. You price it at $50, not at $40. The color's got to be green, not red. And our customers really like it in the big size, not the small size, right? So at this point, there's not a lot of room. You're gradually reducing the room for change, right? As you hone in on the perfect product, right? That you're trying to get to, and so it may be that the team members change. It may be that they adapt, but in this phase, what you now need is you need product managers. And you need product managers who are going to standardize what they do, and they write the playbook, the SOPs, the standard operating procedures for how to bring this product, service, or program to scale to the market. And so your team changes. And finally, the way that you pitch to your funders changes as well. Previously, you were saying, "Please give me money. I've got a hunch, and if with your money, I can prove the hunch works," right? Well, you've done that. You know that people like hamburgers. You know that malarial bed nets is the best technology for reducing malaria. So now the pitch becomes, "I've proven my hunch. Now please give me funding, or please give me support from the company in order so that we can reach many, many more people with this product or service," right? And so now you're starting to grow. Now you have to get into 1,000 shops. Now you have to reach 1,000 villages and grow and grow and grow. And this is the organic growth phase of your social business idea, right? Or your business idea, right? Or whatever idea it is. And I should say, I've been speaking very commercially at this point, because I know that most people on this call are, from corporate backgrounds. For those of you who come from an NGO background, what I'm saying is also true for a purely social idea, a charitable idea, right? You still have to create a product, which in this case would be a program, and prototype it, and then standardize it in the way that I'm describing. The only difference would be that whereas a commercial product is sold, and so you have all those commercial considerations, now as a charity, you're just focusing on the impact side of things, right? But this framework works whether you are an NGO or whether you are a business, right? You still have to go through these two phases, right? And then finally, if you've been through the prototyping phase, you've proven your hunch, you know what works, you've taken it up into standardization, and you've gone and refined all of those parameters, the design, the price, the delivery, the marketing, the sales, so that you know exactly how to deliver a unified product or service to, thousands and thousands of customers. Only then are you ready for the final stage, which is mass scaling up of your product, service, or idea. And I should say that there are many, many organizations that never, ever get out of the standardization phase, right? It is not a given that you will perfect your product to the point where you're able then to scale it up to truly, truly mass market, right? There are many organizations that just chug along constantly in the standardization phase, and that may not even realize that there is a phase beyond that, which is the quantum leap into a much, much broader level of scale. Okay, and it also may be that there are many organizations that do not elect to go into the third phase at all, right? They deliberately choose a certain level of scale of operation of which they are comfortable, right? So the analogy that I often give with my clients is not every restaurant wants to be McDonald's, right? I mean, that will work for some restaurants that want to reach 1 billion customers. But, you know, there are many restaurants that are very happy to be a Michelin 3-star restaurant that's, you know, is the best in their city, and they only have one branch, or they only have 1 or 2, right? And so scale is not an automatic given that is what everyone wants, right? And there's a certain optimal level of scale that is suitable for many organizations. And so it is not a given that you either want to or that you even need to leave the standardization phase, right? And another thing that I should mention is the standardization phase can be very, very large. So you could be operating 10,000 shops, sorry, 1,000 shops, right? Or setting up your product, you know, in 10,000 villages or cities. And you would still be in what I would call the standardization phase. Right. So standardization does not mean small scale. Just to clarify that point. So what do I mean by the scaling phase? Well, in the scaling phase, and for those handful of organizations, and there are frankly probably no more than 5% of all organizations and products and services out there that actually go into this phase, it's about entering into a totally new trajectory of scale. Okay, so what this phase is characterized by 3 things. The first is that you will almost certainly have to change from do it yourself into what I call influence others. Okay, so you know, imagine my hamburger store, right? So there's the chef who's got the hamburger. He's launched a very successful hamburger store, and for him, he's got to 10 stalls. And he's running around like crazy, trying to manage 10 shops, right, that are selling hamburgers. And that's probably the limit of what that organization can do when it tries to do everything by itself, right? So what happens is that if you want to go from 10 stores to 1 million, you can't do that by yourself anymore. The organization will have to change from liquid to steam. And what that might look like in the case of a hamburger outlet, for example, is change from the first iteration of McDonald's, which was the McDonald brothers doing it by themselves, to Ray Kroc's franchising model, where they stopped being a burger selling organization and become a burger franchising organization, right? And the entire business model changes at that point, because it's not possible to get to 1 billion customers by running 1 billion stores. You have to change the model in a fundamental way, such that you can package it up so that many millions of other people can now start selling burgers using the way that you did it before. And so in the business world, that might be franchising, right? You create a franchise, and now what you're in the business of is running franchisees, right? It might be consulting. You switch from doing it yourself to telling other people how to do it and giving them your IP. It might be influencing. You package up your IP into a manual or into a book of knowledge, you know, and you begin to influence others with your method or your or your idea, and so you begin to change the way that people think about how to solve that social problem or how to address that need. And the goal here ultimately is what this course is all about. It's about how do you change a system, right? It's no longer about, so in the case of my malarial example, right, the goal is not, I want to be the biggest malarial bed net company in the world, right? The goal is I want to eradicate malaria. And so maybe for my medical organization that's, began by saying we want to eradicate malaria, we ran all these prototypes and came up with the idea of malarial bed nets as the first step in what we wanted to do. We proved that with 10,000 villages. We sold, in 10,000 villages, and we were able to radically reduce the incidence of malaria in those villages. But guess what? Africa is a very big place. Southeast Asia is a very, very big place. There are 1 million areas that our company will never be able to reach, right, simply through organic growth. So what happens at that point is that we switch the business model and become the campaign to eradicate malaria. And what we do is we go out to Africa and governments across Asia and India, and we educate them on the best technologies that collectively will be able to eradicate malaria from the world. And as a result of that, the governments begin to adopt this. One of those technologies, of course, will be the malarial bed net, which is one that we started with and became very successful with. But now what we're doing is we're less interested in actually selling bed nets and more about persuading governments that actually this is how you can solve this problem, right? And so you become an influencer organization, you become a knowledge leader, you become a franchiser of different ideas, a coalition builder, all right? And can you see how different that looks from the early embryonic stage, right? You know, the prototyping stage, and then you became an organization that does one product, and now you're an influencing organization that is changing the way the system works and the way that people think about scale. So we're talking social business or social innovation. That's what scale looks like. And so my analogy here is that the marching band has now become the recording studio. Okay, it's no longer about doing it ourselves, making the music ourselves. That isn't going to reach 1 billion people. So what we now do is we now record the music and then we distribute it on Spotify or wherever. And now 1 billion people can listen to the music, right? So radical transformation of the organization at each of these different levels or the team, right? And the final iteration is very, very different from what came before, right? It's now a broadcast studio. And as you can see, a very different skill set, a very different business model, a very different way of operating. And the funding pitch is for this level of scale is help me franchise, right? You know, I run 25 burger restaurants. They're all doing great. I don't want to run another 25. I want to turn this into a franchise so that I can run 10,000, right? Or I can have 10,000 using my burger recipe, right? And what I'm now in the business of is sharing my burger recipe with all of my franchisees so that we can really become McDonald's and get to scale, right? And so for those handful of ideas that make it into that top league, that is really the dream is to get to that point. I think what I want to do is I just want to give you one real world example of somebody who did this whole process from embryonic prototype all the way up to world changing scale and did it really well. Just so I can give you a social impact example, beyond the commercial examples that I've given. So this gentleman here is an Ashoka fellow. His name is Jerry White, and he is the founder of an organization called Survivors Corps, right? Amongst many, many things which Jerry has done in a very, very long and distinguished career. But his social purpose journey began many years ago when he was a photographer and a reporter working in frontline countries, war zones, essentially. And Jerry had the misfortune to have his leg blown off by a landmine. And it really changed his life. It really changed the trajectory of his life. Obviously, he was disabled for a long time. And during his recovery period, what he decided that he wanted to do was to support victims of landmines and like himself, because he was aware that there wasn't enough support for these victims. And so he wanted to come up with a method or a way of really addressing the issue around the devastation that landmines cause all over the world, where there are millions of unexploded landmines left in war zone territories, that people have just simply forgotten about, and they lie there. And then one day somebody walks into it and blows up, right? And so he ultimately, the mission he gave himself was, how can I end the pain and the suffering that is caused by landmines? So he went through a prototype phase, and what emerged from the prototype phase was an organization called Survivors Corps, which was the idea of a network that would connect victims of landmines with each other to be able to provide mutual support and strength and resilience and to help them to come back, right? And Survivors Corps became extremely successful. So it emerged from its prototype phase, went through a significant growth trajectory, and over the course of 10, 15 years, was supporting thousands, if not tens of thousands of victims of landmines. And so Jerry could absolutely have continued on that trajectory, and he would have stayed in the standardization phase, just simply organically growing every year, adding value, supporting hundreds of victims, and that would have been a great success, right? But Jerry decided that was not enough. And in the early 90s, he met with his team and he said, guys, what our goal is to end the suffering caused by landmines. We've worked with thousands of victims and we do help them. We do make a big difference in their lives. But are we really achieving the systemic scale that we want? Are we really achieving the social impact that we want? Are we really changing the system in the way that we want? And he and his team decided that actually they weren't, that Survivors Corp by itself was not enough. And so they decided that for them, scale meant the ending of landmines, full stop, the eradication of landmines, so that nobody would ever have to suffer in the way that they had suffered. And so in 1992, he actually decided that the next phase of his organization was not to continue. And he actually set in place a 5-year plan that Survivors Corps would end and phase out over that time. And instead, he would launch and shift into a much, much larger organization called the International Campaign to Ban Landmines. And that would be a lobbying organization that would work with governments all over the world to change the law in order to be able to eradicate landmines and to make the case for the eradication of landmines. And so it was a complete transformation of the business model. A new team, a new direction, a much, much more profound vision of what to do based on the credibility that they had had from a decade or more of working with survivors of landmines. So those survivors became the best possible advocates and lobbyists to persuade governments they had to address this issue. And 5 years later, the International Coalition to Ban Landmines had succeeded in bringing together a global coalition of more than 100 governments around the world in order to sign the International Mine Ban Treaty, which banned landmines in the vast majority of countries around the world. And 1 year later, they were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their work in doing that. And this picture is the founder, Jody Williams, receiving that prize in Oslo with members of Survivors Corps and others. And that was their systemic change. That was their systemic scale, right? And I love that example because it shows the evolution of an idea by a brilliant, brilliant entrepreneur from the early days of prototyping and working out how can we support victims to growing Survivors Corps to scale, right? And then completely changing the business model because he realized that there was a way to jump to the end game, which was the global mine ban treaty. And so that is an example of how you can do this. I'm not sure people on this call have to come up with that level of scale. I mean, that was Nobel Peace Prize winning. But we like to inspire at Ashoka, and so I wanted to share that as an example. But I think that the point here is this 3-stage framework: prototyping, standardizing, and only then scaling up. If you bear that in mind as a template and check which level are you at right now, are you doing the right thing at that level? Is your team organized in the right way for that level? And are you pitching to backers and funders using the right ask, right? Are you asking for help to prove the hypothesis in the prototype stage? Are you asking for help to grow your organization and your product in the standardization phase? Or are you asking for help to transform your organization into this influencer, scaling up, franchising model in the 3rd phase, right? Which one of those are you at? And that will save you a lot of grief when it comes to making the wrong pitch at the wrong level, or trying to organize your team for scaling up when actually you're only prototyping at this point in time, right? So this is a way to just eradicate a lot of mistakes that people make. And the primary cause of those mistakes is because they get the wrong stage. They think that they're doing the wrong thing at the wrong stage, right? And this framework I've seen has really, really helped entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs to avoid those mistakes. So I'll finish there and pause there, Sharon, and really happy to have a conversation with people about what I just said.
Great, thanks, Mark. That's such a useful framework, and I know it's really sparked some great conversations and questions in the comments section there. We have a lot of questions that have come in, and I know we're not going to have time for all of them, so you have to make all your responses short and sweet.
Sure.
So I'll start with Martin in Vietnam, who's asking, what are some of the difficulties that we can anticipate at each of these phases, prototyping, standardizing, and scaling up?
Yeah. So in the prototype stage, the biggest challenge, to be honest, is finding a funder, because there are very few funders who back people who've just got a hypothesis or a hunch, right? And typically these tend to be sort of angel investors, private individuals, people who are willing to take quite a lot of risk and to come in very early stage. And so one of the hurdles almost certainly will be finding somebody to back that stage of development, right? And a mistake that people make is that they go out to funders who are not designed for that stage, right? It's a very, very specific type of individual or funder who does it, the angel investor, essentially. So if you're being asked for your 5-year business plan and your 5-year forecast and your prototyping, you're speaking to the wrong funder, right? But most people are, right? And most people are encountering exactly those type of questions. You know, where is your HR manual? How many product managers do you have? You know, all those types of questions. And that basically is because those funders are actually looking for a company or an organization in the standardization phase, right? They're not looking for a prototyping stage. In the standardization phase, I think the kind of traps that you've got is not working out exactly what your goal is. So again, the biggest mistake, actually, to be honest, at any of these stages is to try and run before you can walk, right? So running before you can walk in prototyping means trying to work out all the commercial parameters of your product or service before you've even identified whether it actually creates impact or not, right? Whether it works or not. During the standardization phase, you have to then refine all of those commercial points. What is the price point? What is the margin? What is the right distribution? What's the right sales and so forth, right? And so it's really trying to iterate as quickly as possible in order to refine those points so that you can get to your final end goal, your end product scope as quickly as you can. And then I think the challenge of the scaling phase is to come up with a genuinely scaling model. Most models are not, even though they project big numbers, are not what I would call genuine scaling, right? Because genuine scaling is when you switch from do-it-yourself to mass market. And that nearly always requires packaging up your IP in a way that can be outsourced to many, many more people than you could yourself manage, right? And so getting that wrong is a classic mistake of that phase.
Okay, great. And another good question from Christina. What's the balance between standardizing your approach and remaining responsive to different contexts?
Yeah, I think of it as different products or services. So in other words, you're standardizing your approach, but you know, McDonald's might have the Big Mac as perfectly standardized, but they might be experimenting with the chicken McNugget, you know. And so if you come up with a new idea or a new R&D, that's back to the prototyping stage, right? And you can have several of these on the go, and they could be at different stages, right? So firstly, bear in mind that once you've got a product standardized, you're always able to launch other products and services or programs, right? But secondly, even within the product itself, you want to be evolving and iterating. And I think the way I would think about it is you've got to have a customer feedback mechanism continuously, right? In order to be able to refine what you do, you know, the price, the design, the delivery, the marketing, and so on, right? But at a certain point, you want to nail your colors to the mast and say, no, it's going to be $50. It's only going to come in this size, only going to come in this color, right? Because if you continuously, you know, change to what a new customer might want, you can't get this to mass scale, and that's the issue with that. So it's an art, I think. It's not a science, but I think you want to go through as many iteration cycles as quickly as possible, and then work out at what point does the marginal cost of refinements just drop away at a certain point. And I think you will know what that moment comes when you see it.
Right, that certainly makes a lot of sense. I'm going to combine two questions. One is from Anna Maria, who says, how do you convince corporate leadership to support you in phases that require patience and may not have a quick timeline? Similar to a question from Kieson in the Netherlands, what are your suggestions for working with stakeholders who in the prototype phase are impatient to know if the initiative is working and who may even already be asking questions about standardization and scaling?
Okay, great. So the first question is a really good one. So I'll just quickly address that, which is you are an entrepreneur, you are an executive in a company, right? You've got a hunch for an idea that you think potentially could be really exciting. And you've got to work out exactly tactically, how do you sell this upstairs, right? Okay, so here's a couple of pointers and tips. The first thing is, I think you've got to break it out into little mini steps, right? In other words, you've got to make it very, very easy for your boss or your manager to say yes, right? And the way to make it easy is you only go to them for little micro bites at a time, right? So it could be, hey, listen, I think there's a way that we could use our product in Africa that could be really helpful for a certain population that we're not reaching right now, you know. Would you be okay if I was just to go and just try a little experiment where we take our product and see whether this community, could use a low price version of it, for example, you know, and I'll come back to you with the report on what we discover, right? And if we're successful, this could open up a huge market for us, right? So very few people are going to say no to that because you're being proactive and you're not asking for very much, right? You're saying, listen, I've got a hunch that there's 10 million customers who are just below the income bracket for our product, but I think if we just change the product a little bit, we might actually have some traction, right? So step one, you go away and you try it out with 5 customers, and you come back and you go, guess what? They loved it, right? You know, we halved the price and we didn't offer this feature, but they didn't care, right? And suddenly you go, and so I think what we need now is a little bit extra to actually produce a prototype that we can just test with a few more customers and go. And so the secret is break it out into little small chunks, co-opt your management in this process. You go, okay, we think there's a long-term goal here. Let's just try it out, you know, and we'll come back. And so they're ready and waiting for the validation of what you do. And you almost like work with them step by step. You know, don't ask for $10 million straight away, and don't ask for the team to be working with you full time on this straight away. Okay, so what normally happens is that in the first stage, you're going to have like yourself and a few others doing it almost in your spare time. I'm afraid, just testing it out and working on it, and you're kind of like the mavericks in the system, right? And that's how entrepreneurs have to work. But once you've got a certain level of validation, you might be able to persuade management to begin to allocate more time and resource to this, where you get a day a week or something like that. And you can actually start to create a skunk works team within the organization working on Project X, where Project X is the new product or the new impactful idea or that you're testing. And so gradually it should snowball. But the key here, I think, is sequencing and gating of the different milestones, and try and make them as small as possible, right? So, never ask for £10 million to launch a new product. Ask for 10,000 to do a customer test, and then go from there.
Yeah, it's very smart. We'll, I think, have time for one more question from Adeolu in Nigeria, who's asking, what are the different types of leadership that are required for each phase?
Yeah, very good question. So the leader of a prototype is basically an inventor, right? It's somebody who is kind of obsessed by the problem or the market situation or the need, and is not wedded to a specific product or idea, but is very, very good at just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. Okay, and it's comfortable leading a small team, but often it's quite a chaotic, or it looks quite chaotic actually, because we just tried this and that customer hates that color and we change it, and so on. So there's a lot of adaptation and to do that. Nearly always, the person who leads the prototype stage is either not ideally suited for the next stage or desperately needs to bring on board a COO during the standardization phase. Because you need to have somebody who's going to lead the marching band, right? Somebody has to write the music, but then somebody has to conduct the orchestra, right? To conduct the band. And it's not usually the case that they're the same person. It can be, but that's extremely rare. So I think at that point, once the inventor has said, guys, it's malarial bed nets, let's go, right? You then need to start to hire people who are very good at going, okay, give me the instruction manual for this, and I will build the factory that will produce 10,000 of these, right? And get that going, and hire the team that will do that. And so that's kind of like an operational need that becomes very, very important, because that person will then go and produce product managers and begin to standardize. And then the leadership for the scaling phase, as I've described it, this kind of influencer, thought leader, global ambassador type figure, is what we might call an evangelist. It's somebody who is willing to step out onto the world stage and start saying, listen, if we're going to solve this social problem, we need to address seriously the issue of ... right? And they become a spokesperson, they become an ambassador, they become a visionary. Almost, or at least a really good salesperson, spokesperson, right? And so that has to be a very charismatic individual who is going to get out and get the word out, and also build coalitions for change, right? So sometimes you do see an individual who makes the trajectory from all three. So I would argue that someone like Muhammad Yunus, for example, the founder of the Grameen Bank, which popularized microfinance, is an example of somebody who went all the way from a prototype experiment in Chittagong with $27 from his own wallet, all the way through to building the Grameen Bank to scale, to then becoming the global ambassador for microfinance, right? But it is very rare to find somebody who does all three. It's possible. It is certainly possible. But they're quite different skills, right? The inventor, the marching band conductor, and then the evangelist, right? And that's right. What you need.
I wish we had more time. I know we could have gone so much deeper, and you have so many amazing things to share. There has been a request for further resources. Do you have any recommendations before we wrap up?
Oh, yes. Sorry, quickly, let me just share my screen one final time and just point you to three things. So for those of you who are interested in raising social finance for your ideas, I've produced a website called the socialinvestmenttoolkit.com. And on that, you can find all kinds of case studies and much deeper discussion of the frameworks which I've described, and many other tools and frameworks as well. And it's all for free. So anyone is very welcome to go to socialinvestmenttoolkit.com. My organization is called Social Innovation Circle. I coach executives. I am an investor myself, and I run courses and share the kind of content that you've seen tonight. And finally, on social media, anyone can find me at markch3ng. If you're on Twitter, drop me a line, come and say hi, interact with me on these conversations. I'm always super excited to meet people and share more conversations around these topics. But socialinvestmenttoolkit.com, there are lots of resources up there. Innovation Circle is where we have the actual company, and markch3ng is my social media handle. So come and interact with me on there, and I look forward to that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. We really appreciate you taking time to share all of this with us, and we look forward to connecting with you online. Everyone who's been watching, thanks once again for tuning in, and we will continue to engage in the discussion forums. And I think we will be able to share the PowerPoint presentation for today. So look forward to that. Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your week.